Hello, Team Anastasis. Happy Thursday. As promised, today we are going to look at another parable. This parable is the parable of the sower. And a sower is somebody who would go out and plant seed. So that's not a term that we use a whole lot anymore, but it's somebody who would go out and plant seed. So you have to imagine like a farmer with a satchel, a bag full of seed, and they're going out to plant it. This parable is told, I'm going to read it out of Matthew, but it's also in Mark and Luke, tells the same story. So Matthew 13 is where we find the parable of the sower. And it says, that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood in the shore. So I always like to imagine what these things look like. So if you can close your eyes for a moment and imagine a crowd so big that Jesus, right? It's in Jesus' time, there wasn't like microphones or amplifiers for your voice or anything like that. So he has to set himself apart a little bit so that everybody has the opportunity to see him and he doesn't get kind of swallowed up by the crowd. So he gets on a boat and he pulls away from shore so that the people standing on the shore can see him. And he says, then he told them many things in the parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. So he went out and he's going to scatter his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and birds came and ate the seed up. I don't know if any of you have bird feeders at home, but our neighbors have a lot of bird feeders, and they're constantly knocking the seed out of the bird feeders. And as soon as the seeds land on the ground, there's this flock of birds that come. So that's what I imagine when I'm reading that part. So as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came immediately and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, so it grew quickly because the soil was shallow. So maybe you've seen this in your driveway or in the cracks in the sidewalk where there will be a plant that's coming up in that crack, and there's not very much soil. It's just very shallow, and it springs up quickly. And it says, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. So when plants grow in that shallow amount of soil, usually there's not a great root system. And so it's easy for them to not get enough water, for them to dry out in the sun. It says they got scorched. So that was the second seed. Then it says other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Now, if you have peeked in our raised bed garden lately at Anastasis, this is definitely the case. We had beautiful plants growing in that fenced in area off of the playground. And in that fenced in area, we have raised beds, and we grew all kinds of produce and food and things like that. And if you look now, it's nothing but exactly what it says, thorns, weeds that grow up and they choke out all the other plants. So the other plants can't get enough nutrition because these weeds grow up. And then it says, still other seed fell on good soil where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. So for one seed that was dropped in the earth, there was a crop that grew 160 or 30 times that amount of seed, which is kind of amazing that from one seed we can get so much food and produce. And then Jesus said, he who has ears, let him hear. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to people in parables? Why do you talk to them like this? And he replied, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. This is why I speak to them in parables. And then he said, he's quoting here, and he says, though seeing, they do not see, though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. And Isaiah is another book of the Bible. And it says, you will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For the people's heart have become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and in turn, I will heal them. And then he says to the disciples, but you're blessed because you can see, your eyes can see, and your ears can hear. For I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous men long to see what you see, but don't see it, and hear what you hear, but don't hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. So now this is a rare moment where Jesus is going to help us understand the parable a little bit. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the seed that was dropped along the path that the birds came and ate. The one who received the seed that fell on the rocky places is the man who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. So they hear about the kingdom of heaven, they receive it with joy, they get really excited, and then it says, but since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. So when trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. The one who received the seed that fell off among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of his life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it, making it unfruitful. So in other parables, we've talked about the rich man and making things that are not God idols in place of God and worshiping the wrong thing. And so he says that's what's happening here. So the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of this life, the stress of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, which is money, choke it, making it unfruitful. So it might grow a little bit, but it never produces any fruit. And then he says, but the one who received the seed that fell on the good soil is the man who hears the word and understands it. He produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. So today I would love to have you go through the parable of the sower in Matthew 13 again. It might help to read it in Mark. In Mark, it's chapter 4. And it might help you to look at it in Luke. Sometimes the different perspectives help us understand a little differently. In Luke, it's chapter 8. And what I'd like you to do is think about the different seeds that are described here, the different scenarios that happen to the seed, and see if you can put yourself in asking yourself, what does the seed represent? What does the sower represent? The farmer sowing the seed, what does he represent? And then where do we see ourselves in this story? What does it reveal about the kingdom of heaven? Because Jesus says to his disciples, you have knowledge of the kingdom of heaven, you've seen it, but for people who haven't seen it, I have to help them understand through story. And so this is one of those stories that helps you understand the kingdom of heaven, and reveals something about, again, God's character, and in turn, our character that is reflected. So read the parable of the sower, Luke 8, starting in verse 4, Mark 4, starting in verse 1, or Matthew 13, starting in verse 1. And see if you can discuss with each other what each thing represents in the story. I hope you have a wonderful day today, and we will see you tomorrow.